This was one of my best sessions of the week, starting off with trap bar deadlifts. I was back in Taunton seeing my family on the Sunday for Easter and trained in the morning with my brother-in-law Lawson in this session. And I think I hit a PB on this today. I can't remember what my best trap bar deadlift is before, but I got 240 for free, which I think is a rep PB, but definitely a PB at this body weight. I was previously about 10-ish kilograms heavier than I am now when I did that weight before. So I was really happy with this session. And in today's video, I wanted to talk about the relationship between strength and hypertrophy and how you can get bigger without getting stronger and how you can get stronger without getting bigger and why I value both of these things. So you can essentially think of how strong you are as how much muscle mass you have and how much of that you can use in whichever exercise you're doing, because we all know strength is a skill. And we refer to that system as your neuromuscular system. So when we're training, we're trying to achieve one of those things or both of them. We're either trying to get neural adaptation, which is the first part of the neuromuscular system, or muscular or structural adaptation. And you can get both of these things at the same time, but you can also bias your training more towards one than the other. And what we typically see, especially people new to training or in the first 10 to 12 weeks of their training program, our neural system adapts a lot quicker than our muscle or changes to structure. So you typically see people get a lot stronger very quickly, but it'll take another 10, 12, 14, 20 weeks before you start to see any increase in muscle size. So what's happening in that situation is we're learning to use our bodies more efficiently. So things like motor unit recruitment are increasing. So take this trap bar deadlift, for example. I might get increased motor unit recruitment of my quad to extend my knee off the floor. And that's what's making me stronger, not the fact that my quad has got bigger. But obviously these two things are related. So if my quad did get bigger and I learned to use that in that movement, then overall my force output would be higher. So hopefully that makes sense. And that's how those two things are related, but you can get stronger without getting bigger, and you can get bigger without getting stronger. And that's why I value both of these things in my training, because it's a lot easier to get stronger. Anyone can get stronger. You just have to be really consistent with your training and push yourself. But building muscle is a lot harder and it takes a lot longer. So even though on paper, strength training is not the best way to get bigger, I feel like for long-term motivation and giving yourself purpose in the gym, training for strength is a much, much better way to do that. So over the long term, I think it yields better results for hypertrophy training than just doing your typical hypertrophy training like bodybuilding programs and that kind of stuff. Because the way you train for these two things is slightly different. When you're just trying to get stronger, your technique's going to be different to allow you to lift the most amount of weight. Whereas when you're trying to get bigger, you're going to do things like trying to maximise the range of motion to get more mechanical tension, which will give you a better stimulus for growing cross-sectional area or increasing muscle mass. Again, if we take this trap bar deadlift as an example, it's not going to be the most effective hypertrophy exercise because the range of motion at any particular joint isn't maximised. So if you think about an RDL compared to that, I'm going to get much more hip flexion, length of my hamstrings more, or even a conventional deadlift. But I've limited the range there, and it's going to allow me to get more neural adaptation as opposed to structural adaptation. And in my power building programs, I typically try and blend these two as well as I can, bearing in mind that you're going to be compromising on both at some point in your program. But again, like I touched on, I feel like for long-term progress and keeping your motivation higher, training for strength and hypertrophy at the same time is a much nicer mixture to keep you going, and long-term will yield better results than just training for one over the other. Hopefully that made sense. Let me know in the comments if you've got any questions or want to talk about these topics or any stuff you'd like me to cover in future videos. I'll just quickly recap over what I've done this session. So built up to RPE 9 on trap bar deadlift. I went to a 10 and only got 3 reps on my last set on 240. Then I did a back down to 220 for my last set of 4. And then this is the first time I've ever used a slingshot bench press. And I really liked it. It probably added about 5 to 7.5 kilograms on top of what my normal touch and go bench press would be. And on my sets today, I went up to 130 for my last set of 4, and then back down to, I think it was 110 for my back off set. And then that was my kind of strength section of the workout I'd done, so I moved on to more of the hypertrophy stuff, the higher volume exercises, and did 4 sets of 12 on hip thrust. Sorry, 4 sets of 10 on hip thrust, I think it was. This is my first set on 160. You can see my feet were a little bit too far away and I'm not quite getting full hip extension. And then I made the same mistake on this set, but went up to 180, and then I corrected it for the final 2. But when you're at the top of your hip thrust, your shin should be in a straight line. If your feet are further away, you're going to load up your hamstring more. And if it's too close, you'll probably be using your quad a little bit more. So when you're using this as a glute max exercise, try and get your shin straight at the top. And I think on these sets I managed to correct it. Camera angle's cut off a little bit. But you can see my shin angle is much better there, and I'm getting nearer full hip extension. So I'm going to shorten my glute max more by getting as close to, or getting full hip extension, which is what makes the hip thrust a really good exercise, because most exercises, the hardest part for the glutes is when they're lengthened at the bottom position, whereas on a hip thrust, the hardest part is at the top. So it gives you a slightly different stimulus and a different way to load the glutes compared to your normal like squat patterns, lunge patterns and so on. And once I finished up on this exercise, I finished the session with more accessories, seated leg curl and seated cable row. When you're doing leg curl exercises, going seated is always better than lying, because especially when you're training for hypertrophy, the longer muscle lengths gives you a better stimulus. So when you're seated, it lengthens your hamstrings a lot more compared to when you're lying. So if you've got the choice, I'd always pick this over the lying leg curl. In tomorrow's video, I'm going to talk about different squat techniques. I'm going to go over high bar, low bar, heel elevated, and that kind of stuff, and why you pick one over the other. So if you're interested in that, make sure you check into tomorrow's video. And if you have any questions on some of the topics I covered today, or there's anything you'd like to hear more about, please let me know in the comments, or reach out to me on Instagram, Coach Tom Osmond. For now, I hope you enjoy the rest of your bank holiday weekend, and see you tomorrow.